The wagon hit another rut, and Mara Hale's body slammed against the wooden side hard enough to rattle her teeth. She didn't cry out, hadn't made a sound the entire ride, not when the driver looked back at her like she was livestock he regretted loading, not when they'd stopped in town and people stared through the gaps in the canvas like she was a circus act. Her left leg, twisted since birth and useless below the knee, throbbed with each jolt. Her hands gripped the edge of the bench, knuckles white, jaw set. 28 years old, and she'd learned one truth that never failed. The world didn't care if you hurt. It only cared if you quit. "Almost there," the driver called back, though his tone suggested he couldn't wait to be rid of her. Mara didn't answer. She'd stopped expecting kindness from strangers around the same time she'd stopped expecting her leg to straighten or her body to shrink into something society found acceptable. She was heavy, always had been, even as a child, and her limp made her an easy target for every cruel word the world had to offer. The wagon crested a hill, and Wyoming spread out before them like a promise nobody intended to keep. Endless sky, brutal wind, land so vast it made you feel like an insect. In the valley below, a collection of rough buildings huddled together, the Granger Ranch. Smoke rose from several chimneys, thin and desperate against the gray autumn sky. "That's it," the driver said, pointing with his whip. "Don't look like much, but Caleb Granger runs a tight operation. Works his men hard, pays fair. Expects the same from his cook." Mara's stomach tightened. She'd answered the advertisement in the Helena newspaper 3 weeks ago, sent by post with a letter she'd rewritten 5 times. Experienced cook seeking position. Hard worker. References available. She hadn't mentioned the leg, hadn't mentioned much of anything except that she could work and wouldn't complain. The response had come faster than expected. Terse, practical. "Come to Granger Ranch, Sweetwater County. Position starts November 1st. Wages $20 per month plus room and board." It wasn't generosity. Mara knew that. It was desperation. No woman in her right mind wanted to cook for a ranch crew in the middle of nowhere, and the men who worked these places weren't exactly known for their gentle manners or refined palates. But desperation worked both ways. Mara needed this job like she needed air. The wagon rattled down the hill, and details emerged. The main house was larger than the others, 2 stories of weathered wood with a stone chimney. Outbuildings scattered around it, bunkhouse, barn, work sheds, what looked like a smokehouse. Corrals held horses, some of them the kind of rangy, half-wild stock that could survive Wyoming winters. Men moved between the buildings, leading horses, hauling equipment. Even from a distance, Mara could feel their eyes turn toward the wagon. Word had spread then. The new cook was arriving. The driver pulled up in front of the main house, set the brake, and climbed down without offering to help her. Mara didn't wait for assistance she knew wouldn't come. She gripped the wagon's side, swung her good leg over, and dropped to the ground. Her bad leg buckled slightly on impact, sending a spike of pain through her hip, but she caught herself against the wheel and straightened. The front door of the house opened. The man who stepped out wasn't what Mara expected, though she wasn't sure what she'd expected. Caleb Granger was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that looked like they'd been carved from the same stone as his chimney. His face was all hard angles and sun-worn skin, beard trimmed close, eyes the color of January ice. He couldn't have been more than 35, but he carried himself like a man who'd forgotten how to smile years ago. He looked at Mara. His expression didn't change. Not surprise, not disappointment, not disgust. Nothing. Just a flat, assessing stare that took in her limp, her size, her worn traveling dress, and filed it all away like livestock inventory. "You the cook?" His voice matched his face, rough, direct, no music in it. "Mara Hale," she said, meeting his eyes. "I'm the cook." He nodded once. "Tom, get her trunk." The driver moved to comply, though Mara caught the look he exchanged with Granger, a quick, doubtful glance that said everything words didn't need to. "This way," Granger said, turning back toward the house without waiting to see if she followed. Mara grabbed her carpet bag from the wagon bed and limped after him. The porch steps were high, no railing. She took them one at a time, using her hands on her good knee for leverage. Behind her, she heard Tom wrestling with her trunk, muttering something under his breath. Inside, the house was clean but bare. Rough planed floors, simple furniture that looked handmade. a fireplace big enough to roast a whole pig. The air smelled like wood smoke, coffee, and something else. The particular staleness of a place where men lived alone too long. Granger led her through a main room and into the kitchen. If Mara had any illusions about this job, the kitchen killed them. It was large, she'd give it that. Big work table in the center, cast iron stove against one wall that looked like it had survived the Civil War, shelves stacked with mismatched dishes and supplies. But the stove was crusted with grease, the floor needed scrubbing, and the table was scarred with knife marks and burn stains. A door at the back led to what she assumed was the pantry. A window over the wash basin looked out toward the corrals. "You cook for 12 men," Granger said, his tone as flat as if he were explaining how to nail a board. "Breakfast at 5, dinner at noon, supper at 6. Crew brings their own plates to the bunkhouse for breakfast and supper. Dinner's served here in the main room. You keep the kitchen clean, manage supplies, and tell me when we're running low on anything. You bake bread twice a week, wages paid first of the month." He paused, looking at her directly for the first time since they'd entered the house. "You got questions? Ask them now. Once the men know you're here, things get complicated." Mara set down her carpet bag. Her hip ached, her leg throbbed, and exhaustion pulled at her like an undertow, but she kept her spine straight. "Where do I sleep?" "Room off the kitchen." He gestured to a door she hadn't noticed, tucked in the corner. "Used to be a storage room. Previous cook fixed it up. There's a bed, a dresser. You need anything else? Tell me." "The previous cook? Why'd they leave?" Something flickered in Granger's eyes, too fast to read. "Wasn't suited for the work." That could mean anything. Mara didn't push. "I'll need to inventory the pantry, see what you've got and what you need." "Do it tonight. Tom's heading to town tomorrow. You can send a list with him." Granger moved toward the door, then stopped. "One more thing. The men'll talk. They'll test you. Don't let it get to you, and don't come crying to me about it. You're here to cook, not make friends." "I'm not here to make friends," Mara said quietly. Granger studied her for a moment, something almost like approval crossing his face. Then he nodded and left. Mara stood alone in the kitchen, listening to his boots on the floorboards, the front door opening and closing. Through the window, she watched him cross the yard toward the barn, his stride long and purposeful. Men appeared from various directions, gravitating toward him like iron to a magnet. She saw him gesture toward the house, saw their heads turn. They were talking about her. Of course they were. She turned away from the window and surveyed her new domain. The stove first. She'd need to get that fire going, heat water for cleaning, then the pantry inventory. Then figure out what these men had been eating and how to make it better without using supplies she didn't have. The door to her room was unlocked. Inside, exactly as Granger had said, a narrow bed with a thin mattress, a dresser with a cracked mirror, a single window that looked out onto nothing but grassland. Someone had left a lantern on the dresser and a folded quilt on the bed. The walls were bare wood, the floor just planks, but it was clean. Private. It was more than she'd had in 5 years. Mara set her carpet bag on the bed and sat down heavily. Her legs screamed in protest, the muscles knotted from the long wagon ride. She unlaced her boot, specially made, with a built-up sole to compensate for her shortened leg, and massaged her calf until the worst of the cramping eased. Through the walls, she heard men's voices outside. Laughter. The sharp whinny of a horse. Trot. The ordinary sounds of a working ranch. She'd been in worse places. The boarding house in Cheyenne where she'd worked for 2 years, sleeping in a closet and eating scraps the landlady deemed unfit for guests. The hotel in Laramie where the manager had hired her out of pity and fired her after 3 months because the customers complained about seeing a cripple in the dining room. The brief awful stint in Denver where she'd lasted exactly 1 week before the other kitchen staff made it clear she wasn't welcome. Always the same. Always moving. Always one step ahead of starvation, one mistake away from ending up on the street or in a poorhouse. But this was different. This was isolated enough that there were no customers to complain, no landlady to judge, just men who needed to eat and a rancher who needed someone to feed them. If she could do the work, maybe, just maybe, she could stay. Mara stood, laced her boot back up, and limped to the kitchen. The stove needed attention first. She opened the firebox and found cold ashes and a few unburned logs. Whoever had been cooking before her had let the fire die completely. Sloppy. Wasteful. She cleared the ashes into a bucket, arranged kindling and larger wood, and struck a match. The kindling caught, smoke curling up. She adjusted the damper and waited for the fire to establish itself. While the stove heated, she explored the pantry. It was better stocked than she'd feared, but worse organized than she'd hoped. Sacks of flour and cornmeal, bins of potatoes and onions, strips of dried beef hanging from hooks, jars of preserved vegetables that looked like they'd been put up last summer. Coffee, salt, lard, beans. The basics. Enough to keep men alive, but not enough to make them happy. She found a stub of pencil and a scrap of paper and started making notes. They'd need more sugar, more coffee, dried fruit if she could get it, spices if the budget allowed. Fresh meat would come from the ranch itself. She'd seen chickens in a coop near the barn, and there'd be beef when they slaughtered. The light through the window was fading when she heard boots on the porch, not Granger's measured tread. These were heavier, multiple sets. The front door opened without a knock. "Kitchen through here?" A man's voice, rough and curious. "Yeah, but Granger said—" Another voice, younger. "Granger ain't here, is he?" Mara turned as three men filled the kitchen doorway. The one in front was massive, easily as tall as Granger but twice as wide, with a belly that strained his shirt buttons and a beard that looked like it hadn't seen a trim in months. His eyes were small and mean, the kind that found sport in other people's weaknesses. Behind him, two younger men, cowboys probably, lean and weathered, neither of them meeting her eyes directly. "Well," the big man said, grinning, "ain't you a sight?" Mara straightened, forcing herself not to lean on the table for support. "Kitchen's not open yet. Breakfast starts tomorrow at 5. "That right?" He stepped further into the room, his grin widening. "See, we heard Granger hired a new cook, and we figured we'd come introduce ourselves. I'm Pike. This here's Jesse and Tom. Different Tom than the one drove you out here." The two younger men nodded uncomfortably. Pike, however, looked like he was enjoying himself immensely. "You got a name, darling? Or should we just call you Cook?" "Mara Hale, and I'm not your darling," Pike laughed, a sound like rocks in a barrel. "Got some spine, don't you? That's good. You'll need it, cooking for this crew." He looked her up and down with exaggerated slowness. "Though I gotta say I was expecting someone a bit more, I don't know, more." One of the younger men, Jesse, shifted uncomfortably. "Pike, come on." "Granger said—" "Granger ain't here," Pike repeated. He turned back to Mara. "So here's how things work, sweetheart. We work hard, we eat hard. Previous cook couldn't handle it, ran off crying after 2 months. You look like you might last a bit longer, but between you and me—" He leaned in, close enough that she could smell tobacco and sweat. "You don't exactly look like you can handle much." Mara didn't step back, didn't blink, just looked at him with the same flat expression she'd perfected over years of dealing with men who thought her body gave them permission to be cruel. "You'll get fed," she said quietly. "That's all that matters." "That all, huh?" Pike's grin faded slightly. "We'll see. Last cook made slop that wasn't fit for pigs. You do better, maybe we'll let you stick around." "Pike!" The voice came from the doorway, sharp as a whip crack. All three men turned. Granger stood there, his expression carved from ice. "Out," he said. Pike straightened, his easy dominance evaporating. "Just introducing ourselves, boss. Out. Now." The two younger men fled immediately. Pike took his time, throwing Mara one last look that promised this wasn't over. Then he pushed past Granger and disappeared into the gathering darkness. Granger stepped into the kitchen, his eyes moving from Mara to the stove to the open pantry door, cataloging everything. "You get that list done?" Mara pulled the paper from her apron pocket and held it out. Granger took it, scanned it briefly, and nodded. "Tom leaves at dawn. This'll be ready?" "Yes." He handed the paper back. "Pike give you trouble, you tell me. Don't try to handle him yourself." "I've handled worse than Pike." Granger's eyes sharpened. "Have you?" "Yes." For a long moment, they looked at each other. Then Granger nodded slowly. "Breakfast at 5, he said, and left. Mara waited until his footsteps faded before she let herself lean against the table. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear, she'd meant what she said about handling worse, but from the sudden, overwhelming weight of reality. This was it. This was her chance. A kitchen of her own, a job that paid, a door she could close at night. But it came with Pike and men like him, with Granger's cold expectations, with work that would test every limit she had. Through the window, full dark had fallen. The yard was lit by lanterns, men moving between bunkhouse and barn, settling in for the night. Somewhere, a harmonica started playing, a mournful tune that drifted across the cold air. Mara turned back to the stove. The fire had taken hold, heat radiating through the cast iron. She filled a pot with water from the pump and set it to boil. While she waited, she found a rag and started scrubbing the work table, working the grime out of the scarred wood. Her leg ached. Her back would ache soon, too. Tomorrow she'd be up before dawn, building the fire, making coffee, frying salt pork and eggs for 12 hungry men who didn't want her here. But tonight, in this kitchen, with the fire warming the room and her own hands making it clean, tonight she wasn't running, wasn't being pushed out, wasn't failing. She was staying. And if that meant outworking every doubt, outlasting every cruel word, standing when her body begged her to fall, then that's exactly what she'd do. Because Mara Hale had learned something the hard way, something the world kept trying to teach her, and she kept refusing to accept. Survival wasn't about being wanted. It was about being necessary. And in the morning, when the men stumbled into the main room expecting the same slop they'd been eating for months, they were going to learn what necessary looked like. The roosters started at 4:30, their harsh cries cutting through the pre-dawn silence. Mara had been awake for an hour, lying in the narrow bed and listening to the house settle around her. The temperature had dropped hard overnight, and her breath misted in the air despite the quilt pulled up to her chin. She dressed in the dark, not bothering with the lantern. Her fingers knew the buttons and laces by touch, practiced from years of waking in strange rooms. The heavy wool dress was one of 3 she owned, practical and shapeless. She wound her hair into a tight bun and pinned it in place. The kitchen was cold as a grave. Mara lit the lantern and got to work. First, the stove. She raked out yesterday's ashes, still warm in the center, and built a new fire, this one larger, hotter. She filled the water reservoir on the side of the stove and set 2 large pots to boil. While the water heated, she assessed her supplies against the meal she'd planned. Salt pork, eggs, potatoes, flour for biscuits. Simple, hearty, the kind of food that would stick to a man's ribs through a morning of hard work. She'd found cinnamon in the pantry last night, precious and probably forgotten. She'd use a touch of it in the biscuits, just enough to make them memorable. By 5 o'clock, she had 24 biscuits in the oven, potatoes sliced and frying in pork fat, eggs waiting to be cracked. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, the way ranch hands preferred it. Everything was ready. The men didn't come. 5:15, 5:30. The biscuits were perfect, golden and fragrant. The potatoes were crisping at the edges. Mara cracked eggs into the pan, 24 of them, and kept them warm on the back of the stove. At 5:45, she heard voices outside. Laughter. The deliberate, lazy sound of men who knew they were late and didn't care. The front door banged open. Boots stomped in, loud and careless. "Something smells different," someone said. "Better be coffee, or I'm going back to bed." They filed into the main room, 11 men, Pike in the lead. Granger wasn't among them. Mara stood in the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "Breakfast is ready," she said. "Plates are on the table." Pike stopped, eyeing the spread she'd laid out on the long trestle table. Biscuits stacked on a platter, potatoes heaped in a bowl, eggs piled high, butter and jam she'd found in the pantry, coffee steaming in 2 large pots. "Well, well," he said. "Look at this. The cripple can cook." A few of the men shifted uncomfortably. One of them, older than the others, with gray in his beard, spoke up quietly. "Pike?" "What?" "It's a compliment." Pike grabbed a plate and loaded it high, his movements aggressive, challenging. "Let's see if it tastes as good as it looks." The other men followed his lead, some of them nodding at Mara as they passed, others avoiding her eyes entirely. They settled at the table, and for a moment there was silence as they ate. Then the old man with the gray beard spoke. "Damn." Pike looked up. "What?" "These biscuits. When's the last time we had biscuits like this?" Another man nodded, his mouth full. "Not since Mary left." "Mary couldn't cook for shit," someone else said. "These are better than Mary's." Pike scowled but kept eating. Mara watched from the kitchen doorway, her expression neutral, her heart pounding. They were eating. That was something. That was everything. The front door opened again, and Granger walked in. He took in the scene, the men eating, the food on the table, Mara standing quiet in the doorway, and nodded once. "Good," was all he said, grabbing a plate. By 6:15, the food was gone. Every biscuit, every scrap of egg, every potato. The men were standing, grabbing hats, heading for the door. The gray-bearded man paused by the kitchen. "Name's Harlan," he said. "That was good, ma'am. Real good." "Thank you," Mara said. Pike was the last to leave. He stopped in the doorway, looked back at her, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Don't get comfortable, darling. This was one meal. Let's see if you last a week." Then he was gone, the door slamming behind him. Granger remained, finishing his coffee slowly. Finally, he set down his cup and looked at her. "You did good," he said. "Simple, direct." Then he too left. Mara stood alone in the silent main room, looking at the dirty plates, the empty platters, the crumbs on the table. Her leg throbbed from standing so long. Her back ached from the hunched work over the stove. She started gathering plates. Outside, the sun was rising over Wyoming, cold and clear. The day's work was just beginning. The next 3 days established a rhythm that felt less like acceptance and more like a cold truce. Mara cooked, the men ate, and nobody said much beyond what was necessary. She learned their faces, if not their names. The quiet one who always sat in the corner, the joker who made the others laugh, the kid who couldn't have been more than 17 and still had trouble growing a proper beard. Pike remained a problem. He'd show up late to meals, make comments just loud enough for her to hear. "Heavy on the salt today, ain't it?" Or, "My grandmother made better cornbread and she was blind in one eye." Nothing she could directly challenge, nothing Granger could discipline him for, just a steady drip of poison meant to remind her she didn't belong. Mara ignored him. She'd learned that lesson early. Men like Pike fed on reactions the way fire fed on kindling. Give them nothing, and eventually they'd burn themselves out. Or so she hoped. On the fourth morning, she was pulling bread from the oven when Harlan came into the kitchen. Not the main room where meals were served, but the actual kitchen. Men didn't usually cross that threshold. "Ma'am," he said, removing his hat. "Got a minute?" Mara set down the bread and wiped flour from her hands. "What do you need?" "Ain't what I need. It's about young Cooper." He gestured toward the main room. "The kid's got a tooth that's been bothering him something fierce. Whole side of his face is swelling up. Was wondering if you might have something that could help." "I'm a cook, not a doctor." "Yes, ma'am, I know, but previous cook, she kept a few remedies around. Thought maybe she'd left something." Mara considered this. She'd seen a box in the pantry, tucked way in the back, filled with odd jars and tins. She'd meant to go through it, but hadn't found the time. "Let me look," she said. The box was exactly where she remembered. Dusty, half forgotten. Inside, wrapped in old newspaper, she found what she was looking for. Clove oil. Not much, but enough. She brought it out to the main room where Cooper sat miserably at the table, one hand pressed to his jaw. Up close, she could see the swelling, angry and red. The boy looked like he hadn't slept in days. "This'll hurt," she said, uncorking the bottle. "But it'll help." She soaked a clean rag with the oil and handed it to him. "Hold it against the tooth. Don't swallow any." Cooper did as instructed, and almost immediately his eyes watered from the burning, but after a moment, something in his face relaxed. "Better?" Harlan asked. Cooper nodded, not trusting himself to speak around the cloth. "Keep that bottle," Mara told him. "Use it when the pain gets bad. But you need to see a real doctor when you can. That tooth's infected." "Nearest doctor's in Rawlins," Harlan said. 3 days' ride. "Then somebody better take him," Mara said flatly. Harlan nodded slowly. "I'll talk to Granger." Word spread fast in a place like this. By dinner, every man on the ranch knew the new cook had helped Cooper with his tooth. It was a small thing, barely worth mentioning, but Mara noticed the shift anyway. Men who'd been avoiding her eyes started nodding when they came for food. Someone said thank you instead of just grunting. The quiet one in the corner, she learned his name was Samuel, actually smiled at her. Pike naturally had something to say about it. "Playing nurse now, are we?" he said that evening, loading his plate. "What's next, darlin'? Gonna tuck us all in at night?" Pike, shut your damn mouth, Harlan said, his voice carrying more edge than Mara had heard before. Pike's head snapped up. What'd you say? You heard me. The woman helped Cooper when he was hurting. That's more than you've done all week except run your mouth. The room went silent. Men stopped eating, stopped moving. This was something new, this open challenge. Pike stood slowly, his bulk making the chair creak. You got something you want to say to me, old man? Just said it. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Granger's voice cut through the tension like a blade through butter. Pike, Harlan, both of you sit down and finish eating, or both of you can sleep in the barn tonight. Neither man moved at first. Then Pike sat, his jaw working, his eyes promising this wasn't over. Harlan settled back into his chair and returned to his meal as if nothing had happened. Mara went back to the kitchen, her heart hammering. She'd caused this, however unintentionally. She'd given Cooper clove oil, and now men were choosing sides over it. Late that night, after the dishes were washed and put away, after she'd prepped what she could for the morning, Mara sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and her account book. Granger had given her a small household fund to manage supplies, and she tracked every penny with the paranoia of someone who'd gone hungry too many times. The knock on the kitchen door startled her badly enough that she nearly dropped her cup. She opened it to find Granger standing in the cold, his breath misting. You got a minute? He asked. It wasn't really a question. Mara stepped back, and he came in, filling the small kitchen with his presence. He didn't sit, just stood there looking at her with those flat, assessing eyes. What happened with Cooper? He said. That was good thinking. It was clove oil, nothing special. Still helped. He paused. But it's going to make things harder for you. How? Pike doesn't like being shown up, doesn't like when someone else gets credit for something, especially a woman. He's been top hand here for 3 years, thinks that gives him privileges. Does it? No. Granger's voice was firm. But he doesn't see it that way. So I'm telling you now, watch yourself around him. Don't be alone with him. He gets too close. You come find me. Mara set down her cup. I've dealt with men like Pike before. Not out here, you haven't. Town's 3 hours away. Law's even further than that. Something happens. There's nobody to help except me and the men who work for me. And some of them are loyal to Pike. Why do you keep him on if he's such a problem? Granger was quiet for a moment. Because he's good at his job. Best wrangler I've ever seen. Horses trust him, cattle move when he tells them to. I fire him over personality, I lose half my crew. Men follow him. So I just have to live with it. No, you have to be smart about it. There's a difference. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Previous cook, the one who left. Pike's the reason she ran off. Kept after her until she couldn't take it anymore. I won't let that happen again. But I need you to meet me halfway. You understand? Mara understood perfectly. She was being told to be careful without being offered any real protection. It was the same calculation she'd been making her whole life. How much could she endure before the cost became too high? I understand, she said. Granger nodded and left, the cold air rushing in before she could close the door behind him. The next morning brought the first real test. Mara was in the pantry taking inventory when she heard boots on the kitchen floor. Heavy boots, moving slow and deliberate. She turned to find Pike blocking the narrow doorway. Morning, darlin', he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. Morning. Breakfast is in 20 minutes. Wasn't asking about breakfast. He leaned against the door frame, casual, but positioned so she couldn't easily get past him. Wanted to talk to you about yesterday. What about it? That business with Harlan. Him running his mouth, thinking he can talk to me however he wants just because you played nurse. Pike's voice was soft, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. See, I think you might have gotten the wrong idea about how things work around here. Mara kept her face neutral, her hand steady on the inventory list she was holding. I don't have any ideas about how things work. I'm just here to cook. That right? Pike took a step into the pantry. It was a small space, and now he was close enough that she could smell the tobacco on his breath. Because it seems to me like you're doing more than cooking. Seems like you're stirring things up, getting men thinking they can disrespect their betters. Harlan's been here longer than you have. Age don't mean shit. Respect means shit.
And you—" He reached out, his thick finger jabbing toward her chest but stopping just short of touching. "You're going to learn that real quick, or you're going to learn it the hard way."
The kitchen door opened, footsteps crossed the room, and Samuel appeared in the pantry doorway behind Pike. "Boss wants you, he said to Pike, his voice carefully neutral. Something about the fence line on the north pasture. Pike's jaw tightened. For a second, Mara thought he might refuse, might push this into something that couldn't be walked back. Then he smiled that dead smile and stepped back. "We'll finish this conversation later, darling," he said, and brushed past Samuel. Samuel waited until Pike's boots faded toward the front of the house before speaking. "You all right, ma'am?" "I'm fine." He gets like that sometimes, mean for the sake of being mean. Samuel shifted awkwardly. "Just thought you should know, most of us ain't like him. Most of us appreciate what you're doing here." "I'm just cooking." "No, ma'am, you're doing more than that, but I reckon you know that already." He tipped his hat and left. Mara stood in the pantry, her inventory list forgotten, her hands shaking now that she was alone. She'd known men like Pike. She'd been trapped in rooms with them, in hallways, in kitchens much like this one, the ones who liked to remind women of their place, who found pleasure in making someone afraid. But she'd meant what she told Granger. She'd dealt with worse. She just hadn't expected to have to deal with it here, in the middle of nowhere, with no real escape and no one who could truly protect her. The week crawled forward. Mara cooked breakfast, dinner, supper. She baked bread, roasted beef, made stews that stretched meager supplies into meals that filled hungry bellies. She worked until her hands cracked and bled, until her bad leg locked up so badly she had to soak it in hot water just to make it down the stairs in the morning. The men noticed, started leaving their plates in the wash basin instead of scattered across the table, started scraping their own scraps into the compost bucket. Small courtesies that probably seemed like nothing to them, but meant the world to her. Cooper's face healed, the swelling going down after Granger sent him to Rollins with 2 other men. When he came back, tooth-pulled and looking 10 years younger, he brought Mara a small paper-wrapped package. "Doc said to give you this," he said shyly. Said it was proper thanks. Inside was a small bottle of laudanum and a tin of better quality clove oil than what she'd had before. "Tell him I said thank you," Mara said. Cooper grinned and fled before she could say anything else. That night, Pike didn't show up for supper. Neither did 2 of his closest friends, men named Garrett and Bull, both of whom followed Pike around like loyal dogs. Granger noticed but didn't comment, just ate his meal and left. Mara was cleaning up when Harlan came back into the kitchen. "Ma'am, you got a minute? Got something you should probably see." He led her outside, into the cold evening, toward the barn. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked almost violent against the dark landscape. Inside the barn, in one of the empty stalls, Pike had a horse cornered. The animal was wild-eyed, foam at its mouth, clearly terrified. Pike had a rope around its neck and was yanking hard, trying to force it into submission. "Easy, you bastard," Pike was saying, his voice thick with frustration. "Easy, or I'll—" The horse reared, hooves flashing. Pike stumbled back, cursing. The rope slipped through his hands, and the horse bolted past him, nearly trampling him in its panic. It ran straight toward Mara and Harlan. Harlan grabbed Mara and pulled her aside just as the horse burst through the barn doors and into the yard, still trailing the rope, still panicked. It ran in wild circles, crashing into the fence, wheeling around, completely out of its mind with fear. Pike emerged from the barn, his face twisted with rage. "Somebody catch that goddamn horse before I shoot it!" Several men tried. The horse was having none of it, dodging and weaving, too frightened to let anyone close. Then Granger appeared, walking slowly across the yard. He didn't run, didn't shout, just walked, steady and calm, toward the panicked animal. "Caleb, don't!" Pike called. "That horse is crazy, it'll—" Granger ignored him. He got close to the horse, moving at angles, never directly approaching. The horse watched him, sides heaving, eyes rolling. Granger spoke too quietly for Mara to hear the words, just a low, steady murmur. Slowly, incredibly, the horse calmed. Its breathing evened out. Its head lowered. Granger reached out and picked up the trailing rope. The horse didn't bolt, didn't fight, just stood there, trembling, as Granger ran a hand down its neck. "Pike," Granger said, his voice carrying across the yard. What the hell were you doing? Pike's face went red. Breaking that horse like you told me to. I told you to gentle it, not beat it half to death. I wasn't. You were. Granger led the horse toward the barn, his movement still calm, still measured. And if I catch you handling any animal like that again, you're done. I don't care how good you are with cattle, you understand me? Pike's jaw worked. Yes, boss. Now get out of my sight before I change my mind about keeping you on. Pike left, Garrett and Bull trailing after him. The other men dispersed quietly, not meeting anyone's eyes. Harlan turned to Mara. That's twice now Granger's called him out, he said quietly. Pike won't forget that. Why does Granger keep him? Because like he said, Pike's good, real good. But more than that, Harlan paused, choosing his words. Granger's got his reasons. Lost his wife 5 years back, been different ever since. Harder, doesn't trust easy. Pike was here when it happened, helped Granger through it. That kind of thing creates loyalty, even when maybe it shouldn't. His wife, Mara said. What happened? Fever took her. 1 week she was fine, next week she was gone. Left Granger alone in that big house. No family, no nothing. Ranch is all he's got now. Mara looked back toward the barn where Granger was still working with the frightened horse, patient and steady. She thought about the empty house, the bare rooms, the silence that must fill them at night. Thank you for telling me, she said. Just thought you should know who you're working for. Granger's a hard man, but he's a fair one. He says he'll protect you from Pike. He means it. But he's also practical. He won't fire his best wrangler unless he's got no choice. So I need to give him no choice. Harlan looked at her sharply. Ma'am, I'm not saying. I know what you're saying, and I appreciate it. Mara turned back toward the house. But I didn't come here to hide. I came here to work. The incident with the horse changed something. The men talked about it in low voices, the way Granger had handled the animal, the way he'd dressed Pike down in front of everyone. It was the second public humiliation in a week, and Pike wasn't the type to forget that kind of thing. Mara felt the tension building like a storm on the horizon. She saw it in the way Pike's friends clustered together at meals, in the way certain men stopped talking when she entered a room, in the cold calculation in Pike's eyes whenever he looked at her. Something was coming. She just didn't know what. The answer arrived on a freezing morning 2 weeks after she'd started at the ranch. Mara woke to shouting, men's voices, urgent and panicked, coming from the yard. She dressed quickly and limped to the kitchen, arriving just as Harlan burst through the front door. Where's Granger? He demanded. I don't know. I just woke. It's Jesse. He got kicked by a horse. Bad. Real bad. Through the window, Mara could see men carrying something toward the house. Someone's legs, dangling limp. The shouting got louder. They brought Jesse into the main room and laid him on the table, the same table where they ate meals. He was unconscious, his face gray, his breathing shallow. His left side was crushed, ribs clearly broken, and blood seeped through his shirt from somewhere Mara couldn't see. What happened? Granger appeared, taking in the scene. North pasture, one of the men said, his voice shaking. Horse spooked, kicked him square in the chest. He went down hard, hit his head on a rock. We brought him back as fast as we could. Granger knelt beside Jesse, checking his pulse, his breathing. His face went tight. He needs a doctor. Now. Rollins is 3 days away, Harlan said. He won't make it that long. Everyone turned to look at Mara. She didn't know why at first, and then she remembered. Cooper's tooth. The clove oil. They thought she could help. I'm not a doctor, she said, her voice coming out steadier than she felt. You're all we got, Granger said. Can you do anything? Mara looked at Jesse's broken body, at the blood spreading across the table, at the desperate faces of the men crowding the room. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to admit she had no idea what she was doing. But then she thought about what would happen if she said no. Jesse would die, slowly and painfully, while everyone watched, and they'd remember that she could have tried and didn't. Clear the room, she said. Everyone out except Harlan and Samuel. I need hot water, clean cloth, and whiskey. The good stuff, not the rot gut. The men scattered. Granger stayed, his eyes on her. "Can you save him?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," Mara said, "but I'm going to try." Mara's hands didn't shake as she cut away Jesse's blood-soaked shirt, but her heart was hammering so hard she thought everyone in the room could hear it. The wound underneath was worse than she'd feared, a deep gash along his ribs where something sharp had caught him when he fell, probably a rock edge or piece of metal. Blood welled up faster than she could wipe it away. "Hold him down," she told Harlan and Samuel. "This is going to hurt like hell if he wakes up." She poured whiskey directly into the wound. Jesse's body jerked violently, a low groan escaping his throat even though his eyes stayed closed. Harlan pressed down on his shoulders. Samuel gripped his legs. "Again," Mara said, and poured more. The bleeding slowed but didn't stop. She needed to close it, needed to get the edges together somehow. Her mind raced through everything she'd ever seen, every injury she'd witnessed in kitchens and boarding houses and back alleys. She'd watched a doctor stitch up a knife wound once, years ago in Cheyenne. Watched through a doorway while he worked, his hands steady and sure. "I need thread," she said. "Strong thread, and the sharpest needle you can find." Samuel ran. Harlan stayed, his weathered face grim as he kept pressure on Jesse's shoulders. "You done this before?" he asked quietly. "No." "You know what you're doing?" "No." Harlan absorbed this, then nodded. "Well, you're doing it anyway. That's something." Samuel returned with sewing supplies. Thick thread meant for mending work clothes and a curved upholstery needle. Not medical equipment, but it would have to work. Mara threaded the needle with fingers that wanted to tremble, forced them steady through sheer will. She'd never sewn human flesh before. The needle went in harder than she expected, the resistance different from fabric. Jesse's body jerked again, that same unconscious groan. She pulled the thread through, brought the edges of the wound together, tried not to think about how wrong this felt, how utterly unqualified she was. "Keep going," Harlan said. "You're doing fine." She wasn't doing fine. The stitches were uneven, probably too loose in some places and too tight in others, but they were holding. The bleeding slowed to a seep, then stopped altogether. She tied off the thread and sat back, her hands finally shaking now that the worst was over. "His ribs," she said. "They're broken. I can feel them moving wrong." "Can you set them?" "I don't know how." "Then we do what we can." Harlan helped her wrap Jesse's torso in strips of clean cloth, binding it tight to keep the broken ribs from shifting. It was crude field medicine, the kind that either worked or didn't, with no middle ground. When they were done, Jesse was still unconscious but breathing easier. The gray color had faded from his face, replaced by something closer to normal pallor. Mara cleaned the blood from her hands in a basin of hot water, watching it turn pink and then red. Granger had watched the entire process from the doorway, silent as stone. Now he stepped into the room. "Will he live?" he asked. "I don't know," Mara said. "The wound's closed, but infection could still kill him. Or the head injury, or the ribs could puncture something inside. I don't know." "But you tried." "Yes." "That's more than most would have done." Granger looked at Jesse's bandaged form. "We'll move him to the bunkhouse, keep him warm, watch him. You did good work here." "It wasn't good work. It was desperation." "Sometimes that's the same thing," Granger gestured to Harlan and Samuel. "Get him moved. Careful with those ribs." The men lifted Jesse as gently as they could and carried him out. Granger stayed, studying Mara with that flat, assessing stare that she'd learned meant he was thinking hard about something. "Pike was supposed to be in that pasture this morning," he said finally. "Supposed to be checking the fence line. Jesse went instead." Mara's stomach went cold. "You think Pike had something to do with this?" "I think Pike's been making bad decisions lately. And I think having him around is becoming more trouble than it's worth." He paused. "But I can't prove anything, and firing a man on suspicion won't sit well with the crew. So what are you going to do? Watch him. Close. And if he steps wrong again, he's gone. No second chances." Granger moved toward the door, then stopped. "What you did today, that took guts. Not many people would have tried." "I didn't have a choice." "Everyone's got a choice." "You just made a hard one." He left before she could respond. Mara stood alone in the main room, looking at the table where Jesse had lain, at the bloodstains soaking into the wood. She'd have to scrub that later, have to make it clean enough to eat off again. The thought made her slightly sick. She went to the kitchen and made coffee with hands that still trembled. The sun was fully up now, the day's work waiting. Men would need breakfast, would need to be fed even though the ranch had almost lost one of its own. Life didn't stop for injury or fear or the shaking aftermath of doing something you had no business doing. The door opened. Cooper came in, his young face pale and drawn. "Is it true?" he asked. "Did you really stitch up Jesse?" "Yes." "Pike's telling everyone you butchered him. Says Jesse would have been better off if we'd just let him die peaceful." Mara's jaw tightened. "Pike can say whatever he wants. Jesse's alive. That's what matters." "That's what I told him." Cooper shifted awkwardly. "Just thought you should know what he's saying. He's getting the other men worked up, talking about how you're playing doctor when you don't know what you're doing, how Granger's letting a crippled woman make decisions that ain't hers to make." "The other men believe him?" "Some do, some don't. Garrett and Bull are on his side, always are, but Harlan and Samuel are telling everyone you saved Jesse's life, that you did what needed doing when nobody else could." He paused. "It's splitting the crew. Half think you're some kind of miracle, half think you're dangerous." "What do you think?" Cooper met her eyes directly. "I think you helped me when my tooth was killing me, and you helped Jesse when he was dying. That's 2 more people Pike's ever helped with anything except his own self." After Cooper left, Mara stood at the kitchen window and watched the ranch wake up around her. Men moving between buildings, horses being led to pasture, the ordinary work of a place that ran on routine and hard labor. But underneath it all, she could feel the tension building like water behind a dam. Pike was pushing, testing boundaries, and sooner or later something was going to break. She spent the morning cooking with one ear always listening for sounds from the bunkhouse. Around mid-morning, Samuel came to report that Jesse had woken up briefly, asked for water, and gone back to sleep. Conscious was good. Conscious meant the head injury might not be as bad as they'd feared. By dinner, the split Cooper had mentioned was obvious. Men sat in 2 distinct groups at the long table, Pike's supporters on one end, Harlan's group on the other, with a few uncertain souls in the middle trying not to choose sides. Pike held court like a king, talking loudly about proper medical care and how some people didn't know their limitations. "All I'm saying," he announced to the room at large, "is that cooking and doctoring ain't the same thing. Woman's got no business cutting into a man when she don't know what she's doing." "She knew enough to keep Jesse alive," Harlan said quietly. "For now. Wait until infection sets in. Wait until those hack job stitches tear open and he bleeds out in his sleep." Pike leaned back in his chair, his eyes finding Mara in the kitchen doorway. "But I guess we'll see, won't we, darling? We'll see if your amateur hour actually worked, or if you just made it worse." Mara said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't make things worse. That night she checked on Jesse herself. The bunkhouse was long and narrow, bunks lining both walls, a stove in the center providing heat. Most of the men were already asleep or pretending to be. Jesse lay in a bunk near the stove, his breathing steady, his bandages clean. Harlan sat beside him, keeping watch. "How is he?" Mara asked quietly. "Fever's starting. Not bad yet, but it's coming." Harlan dipped a cloth in cool water and laid it across Jesse's forehead. "I've seen men die from less, but I've also seen men survive worse. He's young, he's strong. That counts for something. I should have done better. The stitches are holding. That's all they need to do." Harlan looked up at her. "You can't control everything, ma'am. You did what you could with what you had. That's all anyone can ask." Mara wanted to believe that, but she'd seen the way Pike looked at her, the calculation in his eyes. He was waiting for Jesse to die so he could prove her incompetent. And if Jesse did die, she'd have no defense. She wasn't a doctor. She'd played at being one because there was no other choice, and maybe that had been the wrong decision all along. She went back to the main house and tried to sleep. Failed. Lay in the narrow bed listening to the wind howl across the empty prairie, thinking about infection and fever and all the ways the human body could fail despite your best efforts. Somewhere past midnight, she heard footsteps in the kitchen. Mara sat up, every muscle tensing. The footsteps were heavy, deliberate. Someone who wasn't trying to be quiet because they didn't care who heard them. She grabbed the knife she kept under her pillow, an old habit from worse places than this, and crept to her door, pressed her ear against the wood and listened. The footsteps moved around the kitchen, opening cabinets, the pantry door. Someone was going through her supplies. Then a voice, low and pleased with itself. "Well, well, look what we got here." Pike. Mara's hand tightened on the knife. Every instinct screamed at her to stay hidden, to wait until he left. But this was her kitchen, her domain. If she let him violate it now, she'd never get it back. She opened the door. Pike stood by the open pantry, a bottle of laudanum in his hand, the bottle the doctor had sent back with Cooper as thanks. He looked at her, not even bothering to hide what he was doing. "Evening, darlin'," he said. "Just helping myself to some medicine? You don't mind, do you? Put it back." "I don't think I will. See, I've got a terrible pain in my back. Been bothering me something fierce. Figure this'll help me sleep better." "That's for emergencies, for people who actually need it. And I need it. So unless you want to wrestle it away from me..." He grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "Though I wouldn't mind that. Been a while since I had a woman in my arms." Mara kept the knife low, partly hidden by her nightgown. "Get out of my kitchen." "Your kitchen?" Pike laughed, a sound like gravel in a bucket. "This ain't your kitchen, sweetheart. This is Granger's kitchen. You just work here, and you're starting to forget your place."
The only one who's forgotten their place is you. Mara's voice stayed steady, even though her heart was racing. "Breaking into kitchens at night, stealing medicine, threatening women, that what you call being top hand?" Pike's smile vanished. He set the laudanum down on the counter with exaggerated care, then turned to face her fully. He was huge in the small space, blocking the door to the main room. "You've got a real smart mouth for a cripple who can barely stand up straight," he said quietly. "Been wanting to teach you some manners since you got here. Maybe now's the time." He took a step toward her. The kitchen door, the one leading outside, slammed open. Granger stood there, fully dressed despite the late hour, a rifle in his hands. "Step away from her, Pike." Pike froze. "Boss, I know exactly what you were doing. I've been watching you for the past 10 minutes, waiting to see how far you'd go." Granger's voice was ice. "Turns out, pretty damn far. She's got a knife? Good, she should, especially with you sneaking around like a thief in the night." Granger gestured with the rifle. "Out, now. Get your things from the bunkhouse and get off my property." Pike's face went purple. "You can't fire me over this. I'm the best." "You're fired. You've got 1 hour to clear out before I have the men drag you off." "And Pike?" Granger's eyes were colder than Mara had ever seen them. "If I ever catch you on my land again, I won't bother with warnings." For a moment, Pike looked like he might argue. His hands clenched into fists, his whole body radiating violence barely contained. Then he seemed to deflate, the fight going out of him all at once. "You'll regret this," he said. "Both of you. This ranch won't last a season without me. We'll manage." Granger didn't lower the rifle until Pike had pushed past him and disappeared into the night. Then the silence rushed in, filling the kitchen like floodwater. Mara realized she was still holding the knife, her knuckles white around the handle. She set it down on the counter with a hand that shook. "You all right?" Granger asked. "Yes." "He touch you?" "No, you got here before..." Her voice cracked slightly. She cleared her throat, forced it steady. "Before anything happened." Granger set the rifle against the wall and closed the outside door. "I should have fired him weeks ago. Should have seen this coming." "Why were you watching?" "Because I know Pike. Knew he wouldn't let things stand after what happened with Jesse. Figured he'd try something, so I've been keeping watch at night." He paused. "Didn't expect him to be stupid enough to come after you directly." "What happens now?" "Now he leaves, and we see who goes with him. Garrett and Bull probably will. They're loyal to Pike, always have been. Maybe 1 or 2 others. The rest will stay." Granger looked at her directly. "You're staying too if you want." "I meant what I said before. I'll protect you. Should have proved that already, but I'm proving it now." Mara sat down heavily at the kitchen table, her bad leg finally giving out after holding her upright through fear and adrenaline.
He said the ranch won't last without him. Pike says a lot of things. Most of them are horse shit. Granger pulled out a chair and sat across from her, a familiarity that felt strange coming from him. Ranch was here before Pike. It'll be here after. We'll hire new men, good men. It'll work out. You sound certain. I'm not, but I'm practical. And practically speaking, keeping Pike around was going to cost me more than letting him go. Already lost one man to a suspicious accident. Can't afford to lose more. You really think he had something to do with Jesse getting hurt? I think Pike's been getting sloppy, taking shortcuts, not checking his work the way he should. Whether he did it on purpose or just didn't care enough to do it right. Either way, it's the same result. Well, Granger stood. You should get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be complicated. He was right about that. By morning, Pike was gone, and so were Garrett, Bull, and a cowhand named Davis, who nobody had expected to leave. 4 men, just like that. The bunkhouse felt emptier, the morning meal quieter. But something else had changed too. The men who remained looked at Mara differently now. Not with suspicion or resentment, but with something closer to respect. She'd stood up to Pike, and Granger had backed her play. In the harsh arithmetic of ranch life, that meant something. Harlan said it plainly over breakfast. Takes guts to face down a man twice your size in the middle of the night. Most women would have hid. Hiding doesn't solve anything, Mara said. No, ma'am, it don't. But most people don't figure that out until it's too late. Jesse's fever broke on the 3rd day. Mara was checking his bandages when his eyes opened, clear and focused for the first time since the accident. Did I die? He asked, his voice rough from disuse. No, but you tried real hard. He managed a weak smile. Heard you're the one who kept me from it. Sewed me up like a torn saddle. Something like that. Pike was saying you butchered me, said I'd be dead in a week from your hack job. Jesse shifted slightly, wincing at the pain in his ribs. Guess he was wrong. Guess so. He's gone, you know, him and his boys. Granger ran them off after Pike came after you. Jesse watched her face. Whole ranch is talking about it, how you stood there with a knife, ready to fight him off. How Granger came in with a rifle and told Pike to get lost or get shot. I didn't do anything special. I just didn't run. That's more than special. That's smart. Jesse closed his eyes, exhaustion pulling at him. Thank you, ma'am, for not letting me die, and for standing up when it would have been easier to back down. Mara changed his bandages in silence, checking the stitches. They were holding. Crude, uneven, but holding. The wound edges were pink and healing, no sign of the infection she'd feared. Against all odds, her amateur surgery had worked. That afternoon, a wagon rolled into the ranch yard. Mara watched from the kitchen window as 3 men climbed down, rough-looking types, the kind who worked cattle and didn't ask many questions. Granger met them, shook hands, and led them toward the bunkhouse. New hires, replacements for Pike and his crew. By supper, the bunkhouse was full again. The new men introduced themselves as they ate. Carson, a quiet type with a scar across his jaw. Monroe, who couldn't have been much older than Cooper. And a man called Dutch, who had hands the size of dinner plates and a surprisingly gentle voice. Heard you've got a cook who don't take shit from nobody, Dutch said, helping himself to seconds. That true? Depends on your definition of shit, Mara said from the kitchen doorway. Dutch laughed, a booming sound that filled the room. I like her already. This food's better than anything I've had in 6 months. You keep cooking like this, ma'am, and you won't have any trouble from me. The other men murmured agreement. Even Monroe, shy as a church mouse, nodded enthusiastically while shoveling food into his mouth like he hadn't eaten in days. Granger caught Mara's eye from across the room and gave her the smallest nod. Approval, recognition, something that might have been the beginnings of trust. That night, Mara sat in her small room and wrote a letter to the woman who'd helped her get this job, a former employer in Helena who'd felt guilty about letting her go and had seen the advertisement for Granger's ranch. The letter was brief, factual. She had work, she had a place to stay, she was managing. She didn't mention Pike or Jesse or standing in her kitchen at midnight with a knife in her hand. Some things didn't translate to paper. She sealed the letter and set it aside to send with the next supply run. Through the thin walls, she could hear the men settling in for the night,
the low murmur of voices, someone playing a harmonica badly. Ordinary sounds, the sounds of a place that was starting to feel less like a battleground and more like something she couldn't quite name yet. Not home, not safety. But maybe, if she was careful and lucky and kept her knife sharp, something close enough to pass for both. Winter came hard that year, arriving in November with snow that fell for 3 days straight, and temperatures that dropped so low the water in the wash basin froze solid overnight. Mara woke each morning to a kitchen colder than a tomb, her breath misting in the air as she coaxed the stove back to life with numb fingers. The new men settled in faster than she'd expected. Carson turned out to be handy with repairs, fixing the wobbly leg on the work table and patching a leak in the pantry roof without being asked. Monroe was young enough to still say please and thank you, which made him a favorite despite his tendency to break dishes. Dutch became her unofficial protector, his massive presence in the kitchen doorway enough to discourage anyone who might have had thoughts about giving her trouble. Jesse recovered slowly but surely. By the end of November, he was back on his feet, still moving carefully but insisting he could work light duties. The scar across his ribs was ugly and raised, the stitches having left their mark, but he wore it like a badge of honor. "Chicks dig scars," he told Cooper one morning, grinning. "What chicks? We're in the middle of nowhere," Cooper shot back. "Future chicks, eventual chicks, the concept of chicks." The easy banter was new, or maybe Mara was just noticing it now. With Pike gone, the atmosphere had shifted. Men laughed more, talked more freely, stopped looking over their shoulders like they expected to be called out for enjoying themselves. But the town was a different story. Mara didn't go to town herself, couldn't, with her leg making the 3-hour wagon ride an ordeal she wasn't eager to repeat, but she heard about it from the men who made the supply runs. How people asked about the new cook, about the woman who'd supposedly driven off Pike Henderson. How the questions weren't friendly. "Mrs. Kellerman at the Mercantile wanted to know if you were some kind of witch," Harlan reported after one trip, his tone dry. "Told her you were just a cook who knew how to use a needle. Don't think she believed me." "What about supplies? She's still willing to sell to us?" "For now, but she's charging more. Says it's because of the snow making deliveries difficult, but I think she's punishing us for taking your side over Pike's." Mara had expected this. Small towns ran on gossip and grudges, and she'd given them plenty of both. A disabled woman taking a job meant for someone respectable, then getting the town's best wrangler fired. That was the kind of story that grew teeth in the telling. "We'll manage," she said, echoing Granger's words from weeks ago. "Yes, ma'am. But it might get harder before it gets easier." Harlan was right. By early December, the Mercantile wasn't just charging more. They were refusing to sell certain items altogether. No sugar, no coffee, no tobacco. Essential goods that made ranch life bearable. Mrs. Kellerman claimed she was running low, but when Harlan pressed her, she'd smiled tightly and said maybe the Granger Ranch should find another supplier. "Nearest other supplier is 2 days north," Granger said when Harlan reported back. "And they're not exactly cheaper." "So what do we do?" Samuel asked. They were gathered in the main room, the core group of men who'd stayed loyal: Harlan, Samuel, Jesse, Dutch, Carson, Monroe, and Cooper. The rest were out checking cattle, unaware of the supply crisis brewing. "We adapt." Granger looked at Mara. "How long can you stretch what we've got?" Mara had already been doing the math in her head. "Coffee we can make last 2 weeks if we water it down and only serve it at breakfast. Sugar we don't need if I can get molasses or honey from somewhere. Tobacco," she shrugged. "That's on you. I don't smoke." "Neither do I," Granger said. "But half the men do, and they're not going to be happy about going without." "They'll be less happy if we can't feed them at all," Mara pointed out. Dutch spoke up, his deep voice rumbling. "My cousin runs a trading post up near the Montana border. Might be willing to sell to us, no questions asked. But it's a hard ride this time of year." "How hard?" 4 days there, 4 back. Through snow and cold that'll freeze your balls off. Pardon my language, ma'am." Mara waved off the apology. "Can you make it?" "I can. Question is whether you can spare me that long." Granger considered this. "Take Carson with you. 2 men travel safer than 1. Leave at first light, and for the love of, He stopped himself. "Just be careful."
They left the next morning loaded with what little cash the ranch could spare and a list of supplies written in Mara's careful hand. She watched them ride out into a dawn so cold the horse's breath came out in great white clouds and wondered if she'd made the right call. 8 days was a long time. Anything could happen in 8 days. What happened was the town made its next move. 3 days after Dutch and Carson left, a rider came to the ranch. Not one of their own men, but a stranger, well-dressed by frontier standards, riding a horse too fine for ranch work. He dismayed in the yard and knocked on the main house door like he owned the place. Granger met him there. Mara watched from the kitchen window, unable to hear the conversation, but able to read body language well enough. The stranger was talking fast, gesturing. Granger's face was stone, giving nothing away. After a few minutes, the stranger handed over an envelope and left. Granger came into the kitchen holding the envelope like it might bite him. "What is it?" Mara asked. Instead of answering, he broke the seal and read. His jaw tightened with each line. When he finished, he handed it to her without comment. The letter was from the Sweetwater County Board of Health. Someone had filed a complaint about unsanitary conditions at the Granger Ranch, specifically in the kitchen. There were allegations of improper food storage, contaminated water, and unlicensed medical procedures being performed by unqualified personnel. An inspector would be arriving within the week to investigate. Mara's hands started shaking before she finished reading. "This is about Jesse, about me treating his injuries. This is about the town wanting us to fail." Granger took the letter back. "Pike's been talking, spreading stories, and Mrs. Kellerman's husband sits on the health board. So what do I do? You keep the kitchen cleaner than a church on Sunday. You make sure every jar is labeled, every surface scrubbed, every pot shining. When that inspector comes, he's going to look for any excuse to shut us down. We don't give him one." The next 3 days were a blur of frantic cleaning. Mara scrubbed floors until her knees bled through her skirts. She organized the pantry with military precision, labeled every container, threw out anything that looked even slightly questionable. The men helped without being asked. Harlan whitewashed the walls. Monroe repaired a crack in the window. Cooper hauled out 3 wagon loads of trash that had accumulated over the years. The kitchen had never been cleaner. Mara stood in the middle of it on the 3rd night, exhausted and aching, and tried to see it through an inspector's eyes. What would they find fault with? The old stove, maybe, with its worn surfaces and temperamental damper? The floor, no matter how well scrubbed, still showed years of stains? Her own presence? A disabled woman doing work she had no formal training for? "You're going to worry yourself sick," Granger said from the doorway. She hadn't heard him come in. "I'm going to lose this job. That inspector's not coming to approve the kitchen. He's coming to find a reason to close it. Maybe, but maybe not." Granger stepped into the kitchen, looking around with an appraising eye. "This place looks better than it has in years. Better than when my—" He stopped. "Better than it's looked in a long time." "Your wife," Mara said quietly. "Harlan told me." "I'm sorry." Granger's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "She used to keep this kitchen spotless, made it feel like a home instead of just a place to eat. After she died, I let it go to hell. Didn't see the point in keeping it nice when there was nobody to care. And now I'm remembering why it mattered." He looked at her directly. "You've done good work here, Mara. Better than good. I should have said that before, but I'm saying it now. Whatever that inspector decides, you've earned your place here." It was the most personal thing he'd ever said to her. Mara didn't know how to respond, so she just nodded. Granger left, and she stood alone in her spotless kitchen, feeling something unfamiliar and dangerous growing in her chest. Not quite hope, but close enough to scare her. The inspector arrived on a Thursday morning, accompanied by Mrs. Kellerman and a man Mara didn't recognize. The inspector was exactly what she'd feared. Thin and pinched, with wire-rimmed glasses, and the expression of someone who'd already made up his mind before looking at the evidence. "Miss Hale," he said, not offering his hand. "I'm Inspector Graves. I'm here to evaluate the sanitary conditions of this kitchen and investigate allegations of unlicensed medical practice." "The kitchen's ready for inspection," Mara said, keeping her voice level. Graves spent an hour going through everything. He opened jars and sniffed them. He ran his finger along shelves checking for dust. He examined the stove, the water pump, the pantry, Mrs. Kellerman followed him around, pointing out things she claimed were problems. A water stain on the ceiling, a crack in a storage crock, a mouse dropping she swore she saw in the corner. Through it all, Mara stood silent, her hands clasped in front of her to hide their shaking. Granger watched from the doorway, his presence a solid wall of support. Finally, Graves straightened and removed his glasses to clean them. "The kitchen itself appears adequate," he said, sounding disappointed. "However, the matter of unlicensed medical practice is more serious." "She saved a man's life," Granger said flatly. "She performed surgery without training or authorization. That's illegal in the territory of Wyoming, Mr. Granger. People can't simply decide they're doctors because the situation is convenient. The nearest doctor was 3 days away. Jesse would have died. That's unfortunate, but it doesn't change the law." Graves put his glasses back on. "Miss Hale, you're hereby ordered to cease all medical activities. If anyone on this ranch requires treatment, they must be taken to a licensed physician. Do you understand?" "I understand," Mara said. "As for the kitchen, I'm placing it under probationary status. I'll return in 30 days for a follow-up inspection. If I find any violations at that time, this facility will be shut down and you'll be required to find alternative food service arrangements." He pulled out a form and made notes. "Questions?" "No, sir," Mara said, though she had 1,000 questions, none of which he'd answer honestly. Graves left with Mrs. Kellerman in tow, both of them looking smugly satisfied. The unnamed third man, probably Kellerman himself, hadn't said a word the entire time. When they were gone, Mara sat down at the kitchen table and put her head in her hands. "Could have been worse," Granger said. "Could have been better. 30 days and he comes back looking for any excuse to fail us."
Then we don't give him one." Granger pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." Mara lifted her head. "What?" "Pike's been seen around town talking to people, buying drinks, making friends, and word is he's planning something." "What kind of something?" "Don't know yet, but he's got Garrett and Bull with him, and they've been asking questions about the ranch, about how many men we've got, what our defenses are when we move the cattle." Granger's expression was grim. "I think he might be planning a raid." "A raid? For what? Revenge?" "Revenge, cattle, supplies. Could be any or all of it. Point is, we need to be ready. I'm posting guards at night, keeping the men armed, making sure we're not caught with our pants down." "How soon?" "Could be tomorrow. Could be next month. Pike's not exactly predictable." Granger stood. "But I wanted you to know, so you can be prepared." "Prepared how? I'm a cook, not a fighter." "You're a woman who faced down Pike with a knife." "I'd say you're more of a fighter than you think." He moved toward the door. "Just keep your eyes open, and keep that knife close." Dutch and Carson returned 2 days later, their saddlebags loaded with supplies and their faces wind-burned from the hard ride. They'd succeeded. The trading post had sold them everything on Mara's list and more, no questions asked. Coffee, sugar, tobacco, flour, even some luxuries like dried apples and real vanilla. The men celebrated like Christmas had come early. Dutch was slapped on the back so many times Mara worried he'd bruise. Carson smiled his rare smile and accepted handshakes with quiet pride. But the celebration was short-lived. That night, 2 horses went missing from the corral. Not stolen exactly, the gate had been left open, and the horses had simply wandered off. But when Harlan went to track them down, he found boot prints in the snow that didn't match anyone at the ranch. "Someone was here," he told Granger, came right up to the corral, opened the gate, and walked away. Wanted us to know they could get that close. "Pike," Granger said. It wasn't a question. "That'd be my guess." The horses were found a few miles away, unharmed but spooked. But the message was clear. Pike could reach them whenever he wanted. The ranch wasn't as secure as they'd thought. Granger doubled the guards. Men took shifts through the night, 2 at a time, watching the approaches to the ranch with rifles across their knees. Mara lay awake in her small room, listening to their footsteps outside, trying not to imagine what might happen if Pike actually followed through with whatever he was planning. The attack came on a Wednesday night, 2 weeks before Christmas. Mara was dreaming about snow when the gunshot woke her.
She sat up in bed, heart pounding, trying to orient herself. Another shot, then shouting from the yard. She grabbed her knife and limped to the kitchen, her bad leg protesting the sudden movement. Through the window she could see muzzle flashes in the darkness. Men running, chaos and confusion everywhere. "Stay inside," someone yelled. Dutch, she thought, though it was hard to tell. More gunshots. The sound of breaking glass as a window shattered somewhere in the house. Mara dropped to the floor, her heart hammering. This was real. This was actually happening. She crawled to the pantry and grabbed the rifle Granger had insisted she keep there, loaded and ready. She'd never fired a gun in her life, but she knew the basics. Point, aim, pull the trigger. Simple in theory, terrifying in practice. The kitchen door, the one leading to the main room, burst open. Mara swung the rifle up, finger on the trigger, and nearly shot Monroe before she recognized him in the darkness. "It's me!" he shouted. "Don't shoot!" "What's happening?" "Raiders. Maybe 6 or 7 of them. They hit the bunkhouse first, but the men got out. Now they're fighting in the yard." Monroe was bleeding from a cut above his eye, his young face pale. "Boss says to secure the house. He's afraid they might try to burn it." "Where is he?" "Out there, fighting." Monroe grabbed a rifle from the rack by the door. "Stay here, ma'am. Don't open the door for anyone unless you know their voice." He ran back out before she could respond. Mara stayed on the floor, the rifle heavy in her hands, listening to the battle rage outside. It couldn't have lasted more than 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. Gunshots, shouting, the sound of horses screaming, men cursing. Then silence. Sudden and absolute. Mara waited, barely breathing. Was it over? Who had won? Footsteps on the porch, heavy and deliberate. The door handle rattled. "Mara." Granger's voice, tight with pain. "Open the door." She struggled to her feet and unlocked it. Granger stumbled inside, blood soaking through his shirt on the left side. Behind him, Harlan and Samuel half-carried Cooper, who was unconscious and bleeding from a head wound. "Clear the table," Granger ordered, his voice rough. "Now." Mara swept everything off the kitchen table. Dishes, supplies, the ledger she'd been working on, and Harlan and Samuel laid Cooper down. The boy's face was gray, blood matting his hair. "What happened?" Mara demanded, already reaching for clean cloth. "Pike and his men hit us hard. We drove them off, but not before—" Granger swayed, caught himself against the wall. "Cooper took a bullet. I think it grazed his skull, and I caught one in the side." "Sit down before you fall down," Mara ordered. She pressed cloth against Cooper's head wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "Someone get water boiling, and find that laudanum." The men scattered to follow her orders. Mara worked on Cooper first because his wound was worse, cleaning away blood until she could see the damage. The bullet had carved a furrow across his scalp, ugly and deep but not fatal. Head wounds bled like hell, but this one wasn't as bad as it looked. She wrapped his head tight and turned to Granger, who'd collapsed into a chair and was trying to remove his shirt one-handed. "Let me," Mara said, pulling the fabric away. The bullet had entered just above his hip and exited out the back, a clean through and through, thank God. But he was losing blood fast. "Am I dying?" Granger asked, his voice oddly calm. "Not if I can help it." Mara's hands were steady now, the fear burned away by the need to work. She'd done this before with Jesse. She could do it again. She cleaned the wounds, front and back, and packed them with cloth. Granger didn't make a sound, just gripped the edge of the table with white knuckles. When she was done, she wrapped his torso tight and helped him lie down on the floor. The table was occupied by Cooper. "Anyone else hurt?" she asked the room. "Monroe took a cut. Dutch got his shoulder grazed, but nothing serious," Harlan reported. "We were lucky. Could have been a lot worse." "Pike?" "Gone. Him and what's left of his men rode off when they realized we weren't going down easy." Harlan's face was grim. "But he'll be back. This wasn't about stealing cattle or supplies. This was about making a point." Mara looked around the kitchen, blood on the floor, wounded men everywhere, the smell of gunpowder and fear thick in the air. She'd turned this room into a hospital again, just like she'd promised the inspector she wouldn't. But Inspector Graves wasn't here. Pike was. And Pike had brought violence and chaos, and she'd done what needed doing to keep people alive. "Help me get Cooper to the bunkhouse," she said. "He needs to be somewhere warm and quiet. And someone ride for the doctor in Rollins. I don't care how long it takes. We need a real physician here. They moved Cooper carefully, Harlan and Samuel carrying him while Mara supervised. Granger tried to stand and nearly passed out, so Dutch and Monroe helped him to his room upstairs, the first time Mara had seen the second floor of the house. She spent the rest of the night moving between patients, checking bandages, administering laudanum for pain, making sure no one developed fever or started bleeding again. By dawn, she was exhausted, her dress soaked with blood, her bad leg screaming from hours of standing. But Cooper was stable. Granger was sleeping. The ranch had survived. When the sun finally rose over Wyoming, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and pink, Mara stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the damage. Bullet holes in the barn, broken fence rails, blood in the snow that would stay there until the next storm covered it up. Pike had attacked them, had tried to destroy everything they'd built, and they'd survived. The door opened behind her. She turned to find Granger, pale and moving carefully, but on his feet. "You should be in bed," she said. "So should you." He looked at her, really looked at her. "You saved Cooper, and probably me too. I just did what needed doing." "No." His voice was firm. "You did more than that. You stood your ground when most people would have run. You kept your head when everything was falling apart. You—" He stopped, something shifting in his expression. "You're not just the cook anymore. You're part of this ranch, part of what keeps it alive." Mara didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to respond to being seen, being valued, being told she mattered, so she just nodded. And Granger, in a gesture that shocked her more than anything that had happened that night, reached out and took her hand. Just for a moment. Just long enough to squeeze it gently. Then he let go and went back upstairs to rest. Mara stood in the kitchen, looking at her blood-stained hands, feeling the ghost of his touch still there. Everything had changed, and there was no going back. The doctor arrived from Rollins 3 days later, a grizzled man named Patterson, who looked more like a prospector than a physician. He examined Cooper first, peeling back Mara's bandages with practiced efficiency, then moved to Granger's room where he prodded and poked until Granger cursed him out. When he was done, he came to the kitchen where Mara was making soup with hands that hadn't stopped shaking since the attack. "You do this?" he asked, gesturing back toward the patients. "Yes." Patterson grunted. "Not bad work. Head wounds clean, wrapped proper. The bullet wound through Granger's side, you pack it yourself?" "Yes." "Stitches?" "Didn't need them. It was a clean through and through." "Lucky." He paused. "You got training?" "No, just common sense and desperation." Patterson actually smiled at that, a brief crack in his weathered face. "That's most of medicine right there. Rest is just knowing which plants do what and trying not to kill people while you figure it out." He pulled out a pipe and started packing it with tobacco. "Heard you got in trouble with Graves over treating that other cowhand, the one who got kicked." "Jesse, yes. Graves is an ass. Thinks medicine is something you learn from books in fancy schools back east. Out here, you learn it by doing, or you don't learn it at all." He lit the pipe, sucked on it until it glowed. "You did good work, both times. Don't let anyone tell you different. The inspector's coming back in 2 weeks. He's looking for any reason to shut down my kitchen. Then don't give him one. Keep things clean, keep your head down, and for the love of—" He caught himself. "Just be smart about it. Graves wants to make an example of someone, prove he's doing his job. Don't make it easy for him." Patterson stayed 2 days, changing bandages and leaving instructions. He also left something else, a small leather-bound book, its pages filled with handwritten notes about treating common injuries and illnesses. "My father's," he said, pressing it into Mara's hands. "He was a frontier doctor, learned everything the hard way. Figured you might need this more than I do. Just keep it quiet. Graves finds out I'm helping you practice medicine without a license. He'll have both our heads." Mara held the book like it was made of gold. "Thank you. Don't thank me. Just keep these cowboys alive so I don't have to ride out here in the middle of winter again." He tipped his hat and left. That night, Mara sat in her small room and read the book by lamplight. It was full of practical wisdom, how to set a broken bone, what to do for burns, which herbs helped with infection, how to recognize when someone was dying and there was nothing you could do but make them comfortable.
knowledge bought with experience and written down so others wouldn't have to learn the same lessons through trial and error. She was still reading when someone knocked on her door. She opened it to find Granger, dressed but moving stiffly, one hand pressed to his bandaged side. "Should you be up?" she asked. "Probably not, but I needed to talk to you." He glanced past her into the small room, the narrow bed, the single dresser, the book open on the blanket. "Can I come in?" Mara stepped back, acutely aware of how intimate this was. A man in her bedroom at night. But Granger didn't seem to notice or care about propriety. He sat carefully on the edge of her bed, the only place to sit besides the floor. "Pike's not coming back," he said. "Got word from town today. Sheriff arrested him and his men for the raid. Someone in town finally grew a spine and pressed charges. They're being held in Rawlins, waiting for trial." "That's good news." "It is. Means we can stop sleeping with rifles and posting guards every night." He shifted, wincing. "But it doesn't solve our other problem. The town still hates us. Mrs. Kellerman's still on the warpath. And Graves is still coming back to find fault with your kitchen." "I know. So I've been thinking." Granger looked at her directly, his ice-blue eyes serious. "About how to fix this. About how to make sure you can stay here without constantly fighting for your right to exist. And I think the answer is simple. You marry me." Mara stared at him. Of all the things she'd expected him to say, that wasn't on the list. "What?" "You heard me. We get married, legal and official." He held up a hand before she could interrupt. "I know how it sounds, but think about it practically. Right now, you're just the hired cook. Easy to get rid of, easy to push around. But if you're my wife, that changes everything. You're not staff anymore, you're family. The ranch is your home by right, not by employment. And nobody, not Graves, not the Kellermans, not anyone, can touch you without going through me first." "That's the worst proposal I've ever heard." "It's not a proposal. It's a business arrangement." But something flickered in his expression, quickly hidden. "I'm offering you protection. Security. A legal claim to this place that can't be taken away on someone's whim." "What do you get out of it?" Granger was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, a reason to keep this place running. After my wife died, I let everything go to hell. The house, the ranch, myself. Didn't see the point in maintaining something that felt dead inside." He gestured around. "But you changed that. Brought life back into this kitchen, this house. Made it feel like a home again instead of just a building I sleep in. I'm not asking you to love me or even like me. I'm just asking you to stay. And this is the best way I know to make that happen." Mara sat down next to him, her bad leg grateful for the rest. "You're asking me to marry you so I can keep cooking for you." "I'm asking you to marry me so you don't have to be afraid anymore. So you can stop looking over your shoulder, waiting for the next person to try and drive you off." He turned to face her. "You stood your ground when Pike attacked. You saved Cooper and probably me too. You've earned the right to be here, and I'm offering you a way to make that official." "People will talk. They'll say terrible things." "Let them talk. They're already saying terrible things." Granger's voice was firm. "I don't care what the town thinks. I care about keeping this ranch running and keeping good people on it. You're good people, Mara. Best decision I've made in 5 years was hiring you. This is just making that decision permanent." Mara looked down at her hands, work roughened and scarred from kitchen burns. A week ago, she'd been terrified of losing her job. Now she was being offered marriage to secure it. The practical part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive through years of rejection and hardship, was already calculating the advantages. Legal protection, financial security, a home she couldn't be driven from. But another part of her, smaller and more vulnerable, wondered what it would be like to be married to a man who saw her clearly and still wanted her to stay, even if he framed it as business, even if he claimed it was just practical. "I need time to think about it," she said. "Take all the time you need. But Graves comes back in 2 weeks, and I'd like to have this settled before then." Granger stood carefully. "Whatever you decide, the job's still yours. This is an offer, not an ultimatum." He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Mara sat on her bed, staring at the medical book still open on her blanket, and tried to imagine what her life would look like as Caleb Granger's wife. Would anything actually change? Would she still cook, still clean, still spend her days in this kitchen? Or would marriage bring expectations she couldn't meet,
obligations that would trap her more than free her. She didn't sleep that night, just lay in the dark, listening to the house settle around her, and wondered if she had the courage to say yes. Cooper recovered faster than expected. By the end of the week, he was up and moving, though he still got headaches and the scar across his scalp would mark him forever. He took to wearing his hat at a jaunty angle to hide it, which made him look older and somehow more confident. "Chicks definitely dig scars," he announced at breakfast one morning to general laughter. "Still no chicks," Monroe pointed out. "Concept of chicks," Cooper repeated stubbornly. The easy banter helped. The ranch was finding its rhythm again, settling into a new normal after the violence. Men worked, horses were broken, cattle were tended. The snow kept falling, deep and persistent, turning the landscape into something stark and beautiful. Mara cooked and cleaned and thought about marriage. She asked Harlan's opinion one afternoon while he was helping her haul water. "Boss asked you to marry him?" Harlan's eyebrows shot up. "Well, I'll be damned. It's just practical. Legal protection, security." "Practical my ass." Harlan set down the water bucket. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, but Caleb Granger doesn't do anything just for practical reasons. Man's been alone in that big house for 5 years, turned down every woman in 3 counties who tried to make a move on him. He asked you to marry him. That's not about paperwork." "What's it about then?" Harlan considered this. "I think he sees in you what we all see. Strength that don't come from being big or fast or strong in the body. Comes from being willing to stand when standing's all you got left. That kind of strength's rare. And I think maybe Caleb recognizes it because he's had to find it himself. That doesn't mean marriage is a good idea. Maybe not. But I'll tell you this, you've already changed this place just by being here. Made it better. Made us better. Can't see how making that permanent would be a bad thing." She asked Samuel next, catching him in the barn while he was repairing tack. "You thinking about saying yes?" he asked. "I don't know. That's why I'm asking opinions." Samuel worked quietly for a moment, his needle moving through leather with practiced ease. "My wife died 7 years ago. Cholera. We'd been married 3 years, barely knew each other when we started. It was arranged by our families, practical just like what Granger's offering you. But somewhere along the way, it became real. Became love. Not the romantic kind from storybooks, but the kind that's built on showing up every day and choosing each other over and over. You think that could happen here?" "I think it's already starting to happen. You and Granger, you work well together. You understand each other's silence. That's half of marriage right there, being comfortable in the quiet." He looked up at her. "But I also think you're scared, and that's fair. Marriage is terrifying even when everything's perfect. When it's complicated like this, even more so. What if I'm not enough? What if he expects... If Caleb wanted a different kind of woman, he'd have married one by now. He's asking for you exactly as you are. That's got to count for something." The conversations helped, but they didn't make the decision easier. Mara kept cooking, kept working, kept the kitchen spotless for the inspector's return, and she watched Granger, trying to see past his cold exterior to whatever lay beneath. He was kind in his rough way, brought her wood for the stove without being asked, fixed the squeaky hinge on her door, started sitting at the kitchen table in the evenings, going over ranch accounts while she prepped the next day's meals, a companionable silence settling between them. One night, a week after his proposal, he spoke into that silence. "My wife's name was Caroline. Met her in Cheyenne, married her 3 months later, brought her out here thinking we'd build something together." He didn't look up from his ledger. "She hated it, hated the isolation, the wind, the endless work, but she tried, learned to cook, learned to manage the house, learned to smile even when she was miserable. Then the fever came and she was gone in less than a week. Fastest I ever saw someone die." "I'm sorry," Mara said quietly. "I blame myself for a long time. Thought maybe if I'd taken her back to town sooner, if I'd called the doctor earlier." He stopped. "But the truth is, sometimes people die, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's what you understand that most people don't. You've seen enough hardship to know that survival isn't about being perfect. It's about being stubborn enough to keep going when everything says you should quit. Is that why you're asking me to marry you? Because I'm stubborn? I'm asking you to marry me because you're the first person in 5 years who's made this place feel alive again. Because you're strong in ways I'm not.
Because he finally looked up at her. Because I think maybe we could build something here. Not the same as what I had with Caroline, but something real anyway. Something that lasts. Mara's throat tightened. I'm scared. So am I. Granger's admission was quiet, honest. But I'm more scared of what happens if you leave. If the town drives you off and I lose the only thing that's made this ranch worth keeping. So yeah, I'm asking you to marry me. Not because it's practical, though it is. Not because it solves problems, though it does. But because I want you to stay, and this is the only way I know to make that happen. Mara looked at him, this hard, quiet man who'd defended her, protected her, seen her clearly, and still wanted her here. And she realized that somewhere in the past months, she'd stopped seeing this as just a job. It had become something more, something that felt dangerously like belonging. Yes, she said. I'll marry you. Granger's face didn't change, but his eyes did. Something warmed there, some ice melting. You sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his whole face. Then we'll figure it out together. They rode to town 3 days later, just the two of them in the wagon. It was the first time Mara had made the journey since arriving at the ranch, and her leg ached from the jolting ride. But Granger had rigged extra padding on her seat and stopped twice to let her walk around and stretch. The town hadn't changed. Same dusty street, same weathered buildings, same suspicious faces watching from windows as they drove past. Granger pulled up in front of a small church, the only one in town, and helped Mara down from the wagon. The preacher was an old man named Donovan who'd known Granger for years. He raised an eyebrow when Granger explained what they wanted, but he didn't ask questions. Just pulled out his book and told them where to stand. There were no flowers, no music, no guests. Just Mara in her best dress, which wasn't very fine, and Granger in clean clothes and his good boots. Donovan read the words quickly and efficiently, barely looking up from his book. Do you, Caleb Granger, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Do you, Mara Hale, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Mara's voice came out steadier than she felt. I do. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Granger leaned in and pressed a brief, chaste kiss to her lips. It was over in a second, more formality than passion, but Mara felt it all the way to her bones anyway. They signed the register, paid Donovan, and left. That was it. She was married. They stopped at the Mercantile on the way out of town. Mrs. Kellerman's eyes went wide when she saw them together, widened further when Granger announced flatly, My wife needs supplies. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Mrs. Kellerman's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed, Your wife? That's what I said. Now, you going to sell us what we need, or do we take our business elsewhere? Mrs. Kellerman sold them everything on Mara's list without another word of protest. Even threw in a sack of sugar for free, though whether from shock or guilt was hard to say. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, comfortable. Granger didn't try to fill the silence with meaningless words, and Mara was grateful for it. She was too busy processing the fact that she was married now, that her name had changed, that she had legal protection and security for the first time in her life. When they pulled into the ranch yard, the men were waiting. Someone had told them what was happening, probably Harlan, who had a way of knowing everything before it was officially announced. They stood in a rough line, awkward and unsure, until Dutch stepped forward. Congratulations, boss. Ma'am, Mrs. Granger. He grinned. We got you something. He held out a small wooden box, crudely made but sturdy. Inside was a set of knives, the handles carved with simple patterns. Not fancy, but sharp and well-balanced. Working knives. Carson made the box. I did the handles, Dutch explained. Figured you could use some proper tools. Mara's eyes stung. Thank you, all of you. The men shuffled and nodded, uncomfortable with emotion but clearly pleased. Harlan stepped forward. Next, holding a small bouquet of dried wildflowers tied with twine. Found these pressed in a book in the bunkhouse. Probably been there for years, but they're still pretty. Thought you should have something nice for your wedding day. Mara took the flowers, her throat too tight to speak. These rough men who worked cattle and fixed fences had given her gifts, acknowledged her marriage, welcomed her officially into their strange family. That night, Granger moved her things upstairs to his room, their room now. It was larger than her small space off the kitchen, with a real bed and a window that looked out over the ranch. He'd cleared space in the dresser for her clothes, hung hooks for her apron and shawl. "I'll sleep on the floor if you want," he offered. "Don't want you to feel pressured about anything." "The bed's big enough for both of us," Mara said. "We're married. Might as well act like it." They lay side by side that night, carefully not touching, both staring at the ceiling. After a while, Granger spoke into the darkness. "This feels strange." "Yes." "But not bad strange." "No, not bad." He reached out and found her hand, laced his fingers through hers. They fell asleep like that, connected but careful, two damaged people trying to figure out how to build something together from broken pieces. Inspector Graves returned exactly 2 weeks after the raid, accompanied by the same entourage. But this time, when he knocked on the door, it was Granger who answered. "Inspector, come to check on my wife's kitchen?" Graves blinked. "Your wife?" "That's right. Mara and I got married last week. Means this is her kitchen by right now, not just employment. You have a problem with how she runs her household?" The shift in power was immediate and obvious. Graves couldn't shut down a ranch wife's kitchen without cause that would stand up to scrutiny. The probationary status meant nothing if Mara wasn't technically an employee. "I'd still like to inspect the facilities," Graves said stiffly. "Be my guest." The inspection was cursory and clearly reluctant. Graves poked around, found nothing out of place, and left 20 minutes later looking like he'd bitten into something sour. Mrs. Kellerman didn't even bother coming inside, just waited in the wagon with her face pinched in disapproval. When they were gone, Mara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "That's it?" she asked. "That's all it took?" "That's all it took. You're family now. Protected." Granger looked at her. "How's it feel?" Mara considered the question seriously. "Strange. Good. Terrifying. All of it at once." "Yeah, that sounds about right." Winter deepened and life on the ranch settled into new rhythms. Mara cooked as she always had, but now she also managed the household accounts, made decisions about supplies and improvements, sat at Granger's side during meetings with the men. She was the ranch wife, a position that carried weight and responsibility. The marriage itself evolved slowly. They learned each other's habits, how Granger liked his coffee black and strong, how Mara needed help with her leg on particularly cold mornings. They learned to read each other's silences, to know when to push and when to give space. They learned, gradually and carefully, to trust each other. The first time Granger kissed her properly, not the chaste peck from their wedding, but a real kiss, hungry and seeking, Mara pulled back in surprise. "What was that for?" she asked. "Because I wanted to. Because you're my wife and I'm tired of pretending this is just business." He cupped her face in his rough hands. "Is that all right?" Mara thought about all the years she'd spent invisible, unwanted, dismissed. Thought about this hard man who'd seen her clearly and chosen her anyway. Who'd married her, not despite her flaws, but with full knowledge of them. "Yes," she said. "That's all right." What grew between them wasn't the passionate romance of storybooks. It was something quieter, built on shared work and mutual respect. It was Granger rubbing warmth back into her bad leg on cold nights. It was Mara learning to read his moods and knowing when he needed silence versus company. It was small kindnesses and chosen devotion, the kind of love that showed up in actions rather than words. Spring came late that year, arriving in April with muddy thaws and the first green shoots breaking through snow. The ranch survived the winter intact, cattle healthy, men in good spirits. Pike was convicted and sentenced to 3 years in prison. The town, seeing which way the wind blew, started being more accommodating. Mrs. Kellerman even smiled at Mara once, though it looked like it pained her. One morning in May, Mara was kneading bread when a wagon pulled into the yard. A woman climbed down, young, maybe 20, with a pronounced limp and a bundle of belongings that marked her as someone traveling light and desperate. Mara watched from the window as Granger approached the woman. They talked for a few minutes, the woman gesturing, Granger listening. Then he turned and looked toward the house, toward the kitchen where Mara stood. He brought the woman inside. "Mara, this is Ellen Hayes. She's looking for work."
Says she can clean and help in the kitchen. Granger's eyes met Mara's, and she saw the question there. The choice. Mara looked at Ellen, saw the fear badly hidden, the desperate hope, the way she stood like she expected to be turned away.
Saw herself, a year ago, standing in this same kitchen and wondering if she'd finally found a place that would let her stay. "Can you cook?" Mara asked. "Yes, ma'am. Not fancy, but I can manage the basics." "And you don't mind hard work?" "I'm not afraid of work, ma'am. I'm just afraid of not having any." Mara glanced at Granger. He nodded slightly, leaving the decision to her. "All right," Mara said. "You can stay. Trial period of 1 month. You work hard, you pull your weight, you can have the room off the kitchen. That acceptable?" Ellen's face transformed, relief and gratitude flooding her features. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you. You won't regret it. I promise." "Don't make promises you might not keep. Just do the work." Mara gestured toward the kitchen. "Come on, I'll show you where things are." As Ellen followed her into the kitchen, Mara caught Granger's eye one more time. He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that still surprised her, and nodded his approval. She was passing it forward. The chance she'd been given, the opportunity to prove herself, the space to be flawed and struggling and still worthy of a place. She was giving that to someone else now, the way it had been given to her. That night, lying in bed next to Granger, Mara thought about how far she'd come. From the woman nobody wanted to the woman who ran this ranch alongside her husband. From invisible to essential. From terrified to strong. "You did a good thing today," Granger said quietly, "giving that girl a chance." "Someone gave me a chance once. Seemed fair to return the favor." "I didn't give you a chance out of charity. I gave it to you because I needed a cook and you were available." "I know. But you kept me on because I proved myself. And then you married me because you saw something in me worth keeping." Mara turned to face him. "That's more than a chance. That's seeing someone for who they are and deciding they're enough." Granger pulled her closer, his arms solid around her shoulders. "You're more than enough. You're everything this place needed. Everything I needed, even though I was too stubborn to realize it." They lay together in comfortable silence, listening to the ranch settle into sleep around them. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the promise of summer, of growth, of life continuing forward. Mara had spent so much of her life running, hiding, surviving. She'd been the woman nobody wanted, the burden people tried to shed, the problem without a solution. But here, in this harsh land with this quiet man and this rough crew of cowboys, she'd become something else entirely. She'd become the foundation, the thing that held everything else together. Not through beauty or perfection, but through sheer refusal to disappear. She'd won not by being what the world wanted her to be, but by being exactly who she was, flawed, stubborn, unbreakable, and finding people who valued that. In the morning, she'd wake up and make breakfast for 12 hungry men. She'd teach Ellen how to manage the stove, how to stretch supplies, how to stand your ground when the world tried to push you aside. She'd run this household with the same fierce competence she'd always had, but now with the security of knowing she belonged here. But tonight, she just closed her eyes and let herself feel it. The weight of Granger's arm, the warmth of the bed, the knowledge that she was home. She'd survived everything the world threw at her. And in surviving, she'd built something that would last long after the scars faded and the stories grew quiet. She'd built a life worth living. And that, Mara thought, as sleep finally claimed her, was the only victory that truly mattered.